Today's video is tips for a chairperson who's going to chair a disciplinary hearing, whether internally, so a manager, HR, even the owner of a business, or an external chairperson, practitioner, consultant like me. Why I feel confident to share tips. Welcome back, or just welcome if you're new here. I'm Carmen Fourie. I'm an employment relations practitioner, and I'm also the owner and director of Fourie Employment Relations. I've included a list of my credentials in the description box below to give you some peace of mind around the content that I share. But relevant for today's video is that I have chaired nearly 3,000 disciplinary hearings in somewhere between 400 to 500 different companies in my career. Every level of employee in a vast array of businesses in various different sectors. I have a lot of experience with chairing disciplinary hearings, and I'm also very passionate about sharing my knowledge and experience. So thank you for being here with me today. My disclaimer is my usual one. I share a lot of information in these videos, but I'm not able to cover every exception to the rule or every nuance. Therefore, these videos are for educational purposes only. If you need further assistance, please contact a professional to assist you. Tip number 1. This may seem like something obvious, but it is very important. Tip number 1 is to have all of your things prepared before every single disciplinary hearing that you chair. Now, whether you're chairing 1 or 5 in a day, there was a time where I was chairing on average 5 to 10 every single day, but irrespective of whether I was doing that volume or just one, there are certain things that I would always have prepared to make sure that that which is in my control is running smoothly, efficiently, and that you're also not flustered going into it. Ways that I prepare for hearings every single time I have a hearing is to make sure the night before the time that my laptop is fully charged and ready to go. All of the updates have been done. I'm not going to get to a client's premises. I need to do any updates or anything like that. And then, very importantly, this is super useful, but I have my chairperson notes. This is a blank template that I use for every single hearing that I chair. It has blank spots to fill in all of the important information. It runs with the structure of a hearing. It makes sure that in every single hearing I'm taking similar notes, but I'm also making sure that I'm never forgetting to jot down the very important information. That template, I think, is my second best selling template. It is linked down below, and it is very useful to have that one or something similar on hand. But not just to have that on hand, to have a folder on your computer with a bunch of blank copies. So that when I get to a hearing, I simply take one of those blank copies, I rename it with a company name, the employee's name, and the date. I open it up, I enter in the information as we're sort of getting settled into the hearing, taking the notice and putting in all that information. I will go through the hearing, I will complete my notes, and at the end of the hearing, I will save it. And once I've sent the outcome to the company, that means that case for me is closed for the time being, unless it's going to be further adjudicated. I move it to a folder of complete hearings that is organized by company in my case, because I'm an external chairperson, but you can have an organization system that works for you, because you always want to be keeping those notes just in case your case is going to go further, or for whatever reason you get asked about this again. A side note here is that I highly recommend investing in your two-handed, all-finger typing skills. I proudly say that I type like a machine, but it was something that I made sure that I could do before I started chairing so many hearings, and then of course the skill improved as I went along. My preference with when I take notes during a disciplinary hearing, by the way, I take notes, not minutes. Yes, for the most part I am typing out exactly what the people say, but it is not minutes. If somebody wants minutes of a hearing or they want verbatim exactly what was said during the hearing, then they can record the hearing. I take notes for my own purposes because I need to sometimes go back and reflect on the case, or if I am asked about the case, if it goes further. So when I'm taking these notes, I can type what everybody is saying while we are chairing that hearing, which means that my note-taking is not something that's delaying the process in any way. The information that I enter before we start a hearing is also very efficient because I'm always using the same template. It's very useful to invest in the way that you are taking down notes, because that improves the efficiency and the smoothness and doesn't detract from what is more important during a disciplinary hearing, which is the content of that actual hearing. The other thing that I also have prepared, I think it's very useful to have your templates well organized and easily accessible. So another one that I have is I have a sanctions folder. And this is, again, just blank copies of sanctions, because for the most part, in about 80% or more hearings, we complete that hearing in the one sitting. I do not need to go away, reflect on it, think about it. We complete from start to sanction in that one sitting. And because I have that, sometimes just for efficiency's sake, I can simply right then and there email the sanction to the company to give to the employee. Often for practical purposes, what we will do is instead tell the employee when it's best to return, because often they need to maybe return some uniform, or there are some other forms or some other things that need to be completed. But from my side, I like to be efficient with when I send the sanction. So the first one is that I will often send it right then and there before I leave the client's premises, or otherwise when I was sharing a lot of them and the employee is going to go back another day, I would at the end of the day, when I get back to my home office, send through all of the sanctions for that day and then know that the case is closed. But those are all coming out of a very neat, organized sanction folder. Next tip, and at face value, these tips may seem like obvious things, but I think if we really reflect on them, they are either good reminders for us if we've been doing this for a long period of time, but also they're very critical to how the process of the hearing goes. So tip number 2 is know what you need to do. Be experienced with what you are going to say. Be experienced with the order of the events. Be experienced and knowledgeable about the different sanctions, even the more unusual ones, so that you don't get thrown off if there is hearings that literally about 98% of them will go a certain way, but then there's that 2% that you still need to be prepared for. Know what you need to look for when you are going through a disciplinary hearing, as in what you need to listen out for, what information is important in terms of making a finding, in terms of proceeding, whether it's fair to proceed, and also if you make a finding of guilty, what you need to listen out for to make sure that you make the appropriate recommendation for the sanction. Based off of your level of experience, I'm going to give some tips that may just be good reminders for you, but otherwise they may feel like something you just want to jot down and make sure that you've got this down. So the first one is to really know the order of events that a disciplinary hearing follows, and know it like it's second nature to you. In my Chairperson note template that I've linked down below, it is structured in the typical order of a disciplinary hearing. The only thing that would maybe change from that order is if the employee is going to go first instead of the company, then you can just simply copy paste it or just make a note that the employee went first. And then also the order of witnesses may change, but you would just copy paste the witness block into wherever the witnesses came in. But that is a short way to always make sure that the hearing is following the correct structure. If you are just starting out and this is not second nature to you, you really want to reduce the things that you are actively thinking about when you're sharing a hearing, because there's a lot of things that you need to remember and you need to be present with the actual case that's in front of you. So a way that you could do this is you can take a template like mine and then you can make bullet points for yourself. Little reminders of this happens then. If this were to happen, we do this. If this happens, we proceed to this step. Or if this happens, we don't proceed to that step. Just having a little bullet point or having it as like a side panel with notes for yourself, that will help to reduce the things that you need to actively remember while you're chairing that hearing. The next thing is you want to know what you're going to say. So there are certain parts of a hearing that are more or less standardized in terms of what you are going to say. The first one is your introduction and the explanation of the hearing. Link down below is the exact wording that I use when I introduce myself and the hearing procedure. I explain why I use that wording and also why I make adaptations, but at the end of that video, I literally just go through how I typically introduce myself and a hearing. You really want to, as you're going into chairing hearings, have it down what you're going to say in the different places of the hearing where what we're saying is more or less standardized. So the introduction, our introduction of ourselves and the procedure is one part of that. And then you have other parts like if there's going to be a witness. How do you introduce the witness? Another one, and I have a video on this as well, is how I go through the procedural questions to determine from a procedural standpoint whether we can proceed with a disciplinary hearing. The exact questions I ask are in that video, but also they are on my template template. Then if you're going to find an employee guilty, how do you typically say that? This is going to change, however, of course, because you can add in 1 or 2 lines about why you found them guilty, but there's a certain way that you present that information that you can prepare before the time. The way that I say that more or less stays the same, but then the 1 or 2 sentences that I add to say why I found an employee guilty, only that part will change. Then again, if the employee was found guilty and we're moving on to mitigation and aggravation, I have a standardized way that I proceed to that part. That video is also linked down below. And then again, if you're going to give through the sanction, there's going to be more or less a similar way that you say that. That one, again, similar to the finding, you're going to adapt the wording to explicitly note some of the things that impacted on the sanction. But the way that you, for example, say the person's right to take the case further, those things are all going to be more or less the same for every single hearing. And this is something that you can prepare before the time. When I was learning to be a chairperson, this was something that I literally memorized before my very first day, right before my very first hearing, to make sure that I would not get flustered on the day, that I'm not going to worry about forgetting anything. And if you want, when you're starting out, to have, I wouldn't recommend having it word for word because you're not going to be reading it off, but at least some bullet points that will guide you if you are concerned about forgetting that. And also, if you chair hearings in multiple languages, I spent time to write my speech in one language, and then I translated it and wrote it out into another language, and you practice both of them. Of course, by the how many hearing, it is like complete second nature to you, but this is one way that you can really ensure that you feel good about the language that you're using, you feel confident about the things that are pretty standardized in the disciplinary hearing process. And again, so that you can spend your energy where it matters most, and that is on the unique factors of the case that's in front of you. Another thing that I highly recommend that is going to elevate your skills as chairperson, but I also feel like it is just so critical, is to familiarize yourself with different types of charges. There's a workshop that I've been running for many years for companies around disciplinary action. And one of the things that I do in that workshop is we discuss various charges, but charges relate to offenses. So it's really discussing various categories of offenses and what that offense really means. And when that offense is being used as the description for the employee's behavior, so be it in the form of a charge or be it in terms of writing on a warning, is what are the factors that make up that particular offense. Because, for example, if we have a case in front of us for unauthorized absenteeism on whatever day the employee was absent, we must immediately know what are the factors that we are going to look for in a disciplinary hearing when it comes to chairing a hearing of this nature. So the first one we're going to determine is, was the employee at work? Yes or no, on the particular day or days that the company is claiming the employee was not at work. So we've established that the employee was absent. Now, the second part of that, were they absent without permission or without a valid reason that is generally accepted as an appropriate reason for absenteeism? That is the unauthorized part of that. But we know those are the two things that we need to establish. The person was not at work and they did not have a valid reason for being not at work. This is a very basic explanation, but this is true for all of the charges, from negligence to insubordination, dishonest conduct, breach of company policies, and more. Familiarize yourself with the different types of offenses and what information we look for there. There are some offenses where they are quite typically misunderstood and misused. So familiarize yourself so that in your hearings, and you can do this by the way, if a charge is stated incorrectly, that you can go through the fair procedure of changing the charge such that when you make a finding, the charge is accurately reflecting what you are finding the employee guilty of if you're making a finding of guilty. Link down below, I have two very, very useful resources for this. The first one is a guide to drafting offenses and charges. It lists all of the different types of offenses and their definitions as they are used in the labor environment. And then the other one that I think is very relevant for sanctions and also immediately knowing at the onset of a hearing typically how serious something is that we're dealing with is a disciplinary guide with tables. I think there's like 60 something different offenses on there, and I have included my typical sanction for that offense. Of course, this will change depending on the business, but just to know more or less how serious it is. That is also very helpful in terms of preparation to familiarize yourself with different charges and offenses that you are dealing with. All of those tips are very objective. There are things that you can prepare and do before the hearing to ensure that your hearing is done more professionally and done more efficiently. And it really, really helps you not to make mistakes when it comes to the general procedure, like we spoke about there, not to sort of fumble over your words and say something you may later regret saying. And also when it comes to charges, to really make sure that you know that you are making the correct finding for the correct thing that happened. And also with a disciplinary sanction, that you feel very comfortable that you're not making a mistake. It's very important that we don't make mistakes in disciplinary hearings because, of course, this is somebody's income. This is their job. And also, it can be very risky for a company if you make a procedural mistake. Moving on to my next tip then, which is a bit more on the softer skill side, but equally important. And this tip is, please do not attempt or adopt the persona of a chairperson is meant to be scary. I know this is a thing. This is a thing that comes from other chair people, but this is also a thing that comes from the way that companies may request a chairperson. Countless times when I have been contacted by a company to chair a disciplinary hearing, they will say something to me like, I really need you to be firm and scare this person into not doing this again. This is like so important because anything that we've tried is not working. So I just really need you to come in there and sort of scare them. But that's the request that's put to me. So I do understand that as a result of that and wanting to meet a client's needs, and as a result of our general society's belief that respect and discipline come about through fear, chair people do tend to adopt this persona of trying to instill fear, but I recommend against doing that. Using fear as a way to discipline, it may at the surface seem to result in something meaningful, but it does not. Fear does not result in meaningful change. And also the other reason why somebody may use fear is to gain what they think is respect for their procedure, for them in that position in order to run the procedure efficiently. But somebody fearing you is not equal to somebody respecting you. It may seem like it, but in the essence of it, it is not. Now, if you look at me, I've been doing this for a very long time. And when I started out, I looked a lot younger, and I'm a woman in a field that was at the time, and probably still is, predominantly male orientated. And I've chaired hearings anywhere from incredibly fancy, massive boardrooms to sitting on a crate at a construction site that had no table. I'm not exactly the demographic for hearing that screams respect just by looking at me. Even with my demographic factors and the way that I look at the onset of a hearing, and trust me, I like to mention this because I've seen people's faces when they would ask for a chairperson that is very experienced, very knowledgeable, very good at making sure that the procedure stays on track with very adversarial, very complicated situations. And I show up, I see the doubt in people's eyes, and that is completely okay. But even with all of those factors, I do not use fear to try to get people to respect me. And this is true for any procedure that I run. It's not a fear-based approach. I do not do superficial things to gain the respect of the parties or for employees to take the disciplinary action seriously. I accomplish this through other means. The first thing ties into tip number 1 and 2. I am incredibly confident. I am well prepared. I am never flustered in a hearing. And there is a lot that you can do to make sure that you get that right before you walk into a hearing. And it's something as simple as being on time or getting there early so you're not worried about trying to find parking, to make sure that you feel very calm and very confident. And this confidence is not baseless. This confidence is a confidence in my ability and my knowledge because I invested in it and I continue to invest in it. I have chaired, even very, very early on in my career, I chaired hearings that were very tricky and they had a lot of complexities to them. They had sort of anomalies. There was one of them that was for 6 employees where the company wanted it at the same time for all 6 employees. Those 6 employees were represented by 3 different representatives, 2 of them unions, 1 of them an internal company representative, and that hearing used a translator. There was a lot of complexities to that. So how do you exude confidence even in very complex situations like that? Is that you continue to invest in your ability and your knowledge and your skills. You also invest in your communication skills. Your communication skills are critical. Not only do you want to be able to take in the correct information to make the correct decisions, but a large part of this job is how we communicate. How do we communicate to people in often very adversarial situations, very emotional situations, in situations with a lot of language barriers in different understandings, and we need to be able to communicate to all of those parties in a respectful and confident way. So invest in your skills. I have so many videos on my channel that can assist with this, and also continue to read. The resources that I've linked, I truly believe are valuable, but also invest in your library of resources. And that's what I did and still do, but just not as often because it's not as necessary, is that I used to go through a whole day of chairing a hearing, and then still at night, I would sit and I would read up about different types of charges, different types of cases. I would think about the way that things were said in that hearing and whether they could be done better every single time when I would drive away. Continue to invest in yourself, in your skill, and the confidence should not be baseless. The confidence comes from your skill and your knowledge and your abilities. Let me talk a little bit more about investing in our communication skills. The communication skills in this job are very important. You want to come across with a neutral tone, but you definitely do not want to be robotic. You want to be professional, but you also want to be empathetic. We definitely do not want to be emotional, but we do not want to be emotionless, because a lot of these procedures are a very emotional process. So lacking emotion is going to impact on the procedure that you are running. Please do not ramble off your speeches and your predetermined ways of saying something just to get it done as fast as possible. Watch the people that you're communicating with. Watch their body language. See whether they are taking in the information, whether they're understanding. If your pace is too fast, I am someone I speak very quickly. So often I do have to alter my pace and speak a bit slower when I see that the pace that I'm using is not appropriate. Then you dial it down. So our communication skills need to be very adaptable to the situation. It's not that other people need to adapt to our communication skills. We need to be able to adapt our language use. The sophistication of our language use needs to be able to increase and decrease according to the situation. And that being said, practice your speech, record yourself, sit in front of a mirror, watch your body language. As part of my education, I guess I was quite fortunate that some of my subjects related to how I present myself, my communication, and my body language. So as an example, I did coaching as one of my subjects at university, and a lot of that was around our body language. Sit up straight, have an open body language. Your arms typically open like this. So you want to come across as confident, but not as standoffish, not very close, because in a hearing, you really want the parties to give you all of the important information. Not only do you want them to respect your procedure, but you want them to feel like they can trust you with the information, because you're going to make the appropriate decision if they share that information with you. I'm also familiar with what does active listening look like. So in a hearing, and this is very tiring when you first start off chairing hearings, there's sometimes a lot of information, and you are listening actively to almost all of it, and it's very tiring. I remember at the beginning being so tired after I chaired hearings. However, the more you do it, the more you're investing in your skills, the more you get used to it, you start to be able to listen out for the information that you need and guide the procedure to the information that you need. So your brain is not actively needing to process every single sentence fully. It's still hearing it, it's still listening, you're still recording it, but it is not taking that same amount of energy, because you know what you need to listen out for in order to make the finding that you need to make. But also, the presentation is important. The way that you present yourself to the person is you need to appear to be actively listening. That impacts on the experience that the person has. All of these things are learned skills. They can be a bit awkward to learn and they can be a little bit uncomfortable, but you can learn. You can learn to alter your body language. You can learn to improve your communication skills. One of the other things that I've also often been told in the work that I do is that I have a face that is very difficult to read. What that means is it's not very easy to tell the emotion that I'm feeling. That is not an accident. It is very purposeful in the type of work that I do. This job requires neutrality, professionalism, empathy, and strategic use of body language. This is like any other presentation that you do. You want to be strategically emphasizing certain things, and you want your facial expression, your body language to strategically express different emotions at different points in time. So as an example, if there is an employee that seems to be frustrating the procedure and you are having a difficult time moving on with that, it is not in your favor to carry your irritation on your sleeve. However, at some point to express frustration in a very neutral, professional way, that is in your favor. That comes from the author Peter Block of the consulting book as well, is when it is appropriate and how it is appropriate to authentically express when we are experiencing something that is frustrating, a procedure that we need to get through. But you want to strategically and professionally express it. You do not want to be carrying all of your emotions on your sleeve. You do not want to carry a face where you are expressing disgust at something that you heard, or shock, or flustered, or appear like you don't know what's going on at any point. So it is important to have control over your body language and the expression of emotion as a skill. And again, not robotic. Even though I have a face that's difficult to read, I do not have an expressionless face. I do not go through a hearing lacking any expression. There is a strategic use of expression in my body language. But if you are still learning and it is difficult for you to find that balance, then I would say if you have to lean towards be it robotic or the emotional side, then rather be on the more robotic side, the more professional side, than the emotional side. And then as you're going through it, getting that strategic expression of emotion. That may sound inauthentic, but we are not in a personal setting. This is a type of job that requires a chairperson to run specific procedures in a fair manner while still being able to tailor it to the specific situation at hand and be able to allow space while still managing all of the emotions and a lot of the adversarialness that comes with these procedures. What I'm describing here is the professional, appropriate response to the job that we've been tasked to do. And that's very different from a personal setting. Us having that control over our emotional state and our body language and our communication allows the parties to the procedure that we are running more freedom in their expression, which to my mind is what is important. So to bring it back to where I started, I am very confident in my communication skill. I'm very confident in my body language. I'm very confident that as a chairperson, I can respectfully control the procedure. And this is something when I do consultations for other professionals that I find is important to say. I do cut people off. Yes, it is someone's fundamental right in a disciplinary hearing to have their opportunity to say their side. However, that does not mean that useful or efficient to listen to irrelevant information that really has no bearing on the case. It is our job as a chairperson to guide this procedure. And I do so without any concern that I am infringing on somebody's right to a fair opportunity to state their case. This often happens with a chairperson. And of course, the newer you are to this, the more is going to happen to you. But often a chairperson will feel nervous about setting boundaries. Can I cut them off here? Can I say no to that request? A lot of the time, initially, a chairperson will just grant most of the requests that are asked for postponement or to grant witnesses that are irrelevant, that really add no value to the hearing at all. And they would just feel like they have to agree to everything, and you don't. And it's also not efficient. And it comes down to everything I said before the time. Prepare, invest in your skill, invest in your knowledge. When there is a scenario, for example, where a witness is going to be called, I will ask the person, what is this witness going to come to talk about? And they will say, and I'll say, well, that's not currently in dispute. So you can call them if you'd like them to say it. But I'm telling you now that this is not something that's in dispute. It's not going to have a a bearing on the findings. So that's my next tip. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to say no to requests, and don't be afraid to really guide the procedure instead of allowing extreme inefficiencies. Because when I hear that a hearing has continued for multiple days, either that hearing needs to be really, really unique, or something has gone wrong with the efficiency of that. Because typically it should not take us that long. Hearing that runs over multiple days really needs to have like a lot of complex factors for it to be justifiable for it to run that long. And while you might be thinking, oh yeah, but it's a good idea to get all of the information and so forth, it's not necessarily, because we know what information we need to make a finding. It's very important to get all the information relevant to the finding, relevant to the sanction. However, there is a point where just gathering information, allowing for everything, overcomplicates the procedure, and it unnecessarily drags it out, and it actually impacts on the resources that the company is spending on this, as well as it can often confuse and derail a procedure where the parties have lost sight of what is the most important factors to focus on. So that's my tip. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to set limitations. Know, of course, what an employee is entitled to and their rights, and don't infringe on that. But there's a lot of room for saying no that definitely does not infringe on somebody's right to a fair procedure and a fair opportunity. Now, I'm going to share my final tip for this video. I probably will make more videos on this topic. Let me know in the comment section down below if you'd like to see it or you have any particular questions. But my last tip is also around, I guess, the softer skills. And that is to do your work, not just in terms of the communication, but in terms of your personal feelings towards things, but also your approach in general to the concept of discipline, of counterproductive work behavior, of the parties to the employment relationship, to really check yourself in terms of your approaches to these things. Because there's one thing, like I said earlier in the video, to invest in our communication, and there's certain standardized things that we say so we can prepare this. But more fundamentally, and I'm going to get to my point now, I'm going to give some examples of what I'm saying here. But more fundamentally, if we continue to invest in our general approach and check ourselves, then our communication is more likely to organically flow, and we're less likely to worry about how to say something when we have done the work that we, at a fundamental level, feel comfortable with our approach. What I mean by this, in many of my videos, you will see me talk about the importance of compassionate communication. As soon as somebody hears the word compassion, though, they automatically start thinking about like very soft, very like therapy type things. And I mean, it could mean that, but that's not what I mean. What I mean by compassionate communication is I mean empathetic communication. Communication that acknowledges the humanness of the person that you are dealing with, the person that you are talking to, the parties that are involved with the procedure that you are dealing with. If this is the type of work that you do, you are likely to come across situations that may hit a nerve for you, that may be a bit harder for you to hear or to deal with than other situations. So one of the things that I cover in my training with managers on how to deal with discipline on a day-to-day basis is know when to step away and have somebody else deal with something as a baseline. To know that this is a type of case that you do not feel is appropriate for you to deal with. Maybe it's too muddled up in your personal life, or maybe it is of a particular topic that you feel that you would not be able to remain neutral and professional, and to have that awareness of when we are not the best person for something. Now, if this is your job, but also just generally, there's a lot that we can do to invest in ourselves and our approach to mean that we are not less affected, but that we have a very good awareness and separation of self from the situation. And the way that we approach the situation can be one of full presence and acknowledgement of the humanness of the other person without muddling up our own personal opinions and feelings of things. Now, for an example, I'm a female chairperson. So one of the topics that I get asked to chair more often than my male colleagues would be the ones related to sexual harassment, be it of male or female. And The reason for that is because there's a generalization that maybe people will be more willing and open to discuss this with a female chairperson. But as you can imagine with those hearings, there is a lot of difficult elements to discuss with that. And it's very important that we can listen with an acknowledgement of the humanness of that other person without sitting there making moralistic judgments. And one of the resources that I highly recommend is the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I originally read this book because I thought it was going to improve my negotiation skills. And it did, but it was also life-altering in terms of truly embodying an approach where I can acknowledge my experience without numbing it, without suppressing it, without sticking it in a box, and still be entirely present with the humanness of somebody else who may be explaining behavior to me that before I really invested in nonviolent communication may have been very disturbed by, may have made certain judgments about right and wrong and good and bad, where through the process of investing in nonviolent communication, I've read the book several times. I've also done several courses on that, and I continue to invest in my skill with that. But because I have done that, I'm able to be present with what that person is telling me, take in that information without sitting there making moral judgments about right, wrong, good, bad, etc., and still fully acknowledge the consequences of behavior, fully acknowledge accountability, the importance of that, but not losing sight of the human being that is sitting in front of me. And if we choose to do this type of work, I do think that it is entirely necessary for us to really have a solid foundation of understanding that the concept of right, wrong, good, bad, etc. is incredibly subjective, and there really is no space for that in a disciplinary hearing, because what we're doing there is we're making a finding on a charge. We're not making a finding about a person. We are talking about the consequences of behavior, and we're making appropriate decisions about whether this relationship should or shouldn't continue and what the appropriate sanction should be. We are not making decisions about who a human being is. We're not making decisions about whether their behavior is good or bad, or whether they're a good person or a bad person. We are sticking to behavior, the charges that are in front of us, and it's our job to have an awareness of our own biases, our own feelings, our own things, so that we can separate them without numbing. We're still there as a fully present human being and allow for this procedure to run well. And again, like I said previously, with confidence, with neutrality, but not robotic. We still have expression. We still have empathy. So to conclude this, I highly recommend when you are investing in your skills, look for people who you not only admire in terms of their skills, their knowledge, but also their fundamental approach to the employment relationship, their fundamental approach to people, because people are a party to the employment relationship. This is a job of people. This is not a job of just factual information. Yes, it requires us to be quite knowledgeable. Yes, we have a very good understanding of the labor legislation and so forth. People are this job. This job is a facilitation of procedures around people. So I highly recommend that you continue to invest in your people skills, your communication skills, your approach to people, the ways that you understand the workings of the employment relationship, such that you have a very good idea and framework for sitting there knowing the different parties. And with every procedure, even if that's not the main focal point, things like your negotiation skills. So earlier when I spoke about strategic use of my body language and so forth, that all sounds very, maybe personal word that somebody would use is manipulative, but no, it's literally part of negotiation skills, and it is part of our skills to be able to efficiently run these procedures and make the appropriate decisions at the end of it, and to negotiate with parties, especially when they are sitting at opposite ends and they seem to not be able to see a commonality, and it seems to be very difficult to see where we'd be able to find agreement. Now, that's not particular to a hearing, because in a hearing a lot of the time we are making a decision, but throughout the procedure you will find in many hearings that there is times where you will need to use negotiation skills in order for the procedure to proceed or not to proceed. So these are things worth investing in. I highly recommend my resources, my videos, but I also highly recommend the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And with that, I'm going to end off today's video. I did go through that very quickly, but I hope that it is useful. I hope that this information in this video was valuable for you today. And I will continue to share my knowledge and passion of the employment relationship. So please subscribe and like, and also share this video if you think that there is value for anybody else. Thank you for being here today.